Hello. The purpose of this video is to provide a brief introduction to the California Building Code, how to use it when you are starting a new project. The Department of General Services actually has a accessible version of the California Building Code. Um, the California Building Code is part of the California Code of Regulations, meaning the laws of California, and it's dubbed Title 24. Title 24 is composed of 12 parts. Part 1 is the administrative code regarding buildings. Part 2 is the California Building Code itself. Part 2.5 is something relatively new. Not new this year, but new in the last few years. California Residential Code, solely focused on residential buildings. Then we got the electrical code for part 3, mechanical code for part 4, plumbing code for part 5, energy code for part 6. Part 7 is not used. Um, Historical building code is part 8, fire code is part 9, existing building code part 10, um, energy or green building code is part 11, and standards, reference standards, that means like the codes that's been used is in part 12. It has been misnomer to call Title 24 the energy code. Okay, see, energy codes is actually just part 6 of Title 24, but in common parlance in California, even if you look it up, Title 24 in Google, they refer to Title 24 as the energy code, which is not true. Um, Title 24 is actually the whole 12 part code, and the energy code is part of Title 24. So is the building code. So it is a misnomer. Now, the California Building Code is made up of standards that has been adapted and adopted uh, from existing other codes of the national model, international model also. Also, some laws that the Senate has enacted because of some issues regarding safety, or they want to protect the public use. Okay, so California Building Code is not just about, Title 24, okay, it's not just about energy. It is about the whole building code. Okay, so in your particular office for an architect, you would see these binders in their library. Okay, so their library could just be a shelf of books, or it could be a good size of a room, 10 feet by 10 feet, and you would see old copies of the building code. Before it was called the UBC, or the Uniform Building Code. You can see here it's 1991 all the way to 2019. That's the last code, and then there's a new version that was released last year, 2022. Um, in any case, there are modifications for each one because new legislation or amendments to existing ones. And an architect would buy these very, very thick binders. And so the architect's main focus is just the Building Code Volume 1 and Volume 2. Uh, and in Volume 1, it's mostly what they focus on. And you can see that this is a very thick binder. However, I myself don't have a copy of this binder. It's something that changes from time to time because of new laws and legislation, but an architect's office would definitely have something printed like these. So, luckily for us, the 2019, the last version, is accessible as a PDF from this website. So if you click on this website, it will open for you a PDF of the 2019 California Building Code. Um, Even though there is a 2022 Building Code, the city or county, when you apply for a building permit or search their website, they would actually say that their building permits will require approval based on the 2019 building code. And since 2022 has just been released last year, some cities, some counties would be slow to adopt the new building code for 2022. So most likely they're still in 2019. Maybe 3, 4, 5 years to come, they're still gonna be using the 2019 building code until they finally adopt the whole thing. So here's what it looks like. This is the cover, and here's your table of contents. And here's the actual contents inside that book. And you can see if you try to print this page, this is what's going to look like. Okay, there are different chapters inside each one, and we're going to start with occupancy, but definitions. You're going to see the definitions, how they adopted these books, and you will have see here some words that defines what is a diaphragm, dimensions, what's direct access, and all that other stuff. But we will start with this one, occupancy classification. And if you look at through this one, this is written in a very wordy two-column type of explanation and subsections. There are some tables to read, and we're gonna go through this one. So if you wanted to look that up, I provided this link here, and we'll have a PDF of this one um, on our dashboard. Okay, so where are we? The 2022 California Building Code is also posted. It's a little harder to access because it's not in PDF. And you can see here, you can subscribe to uh, the digital access uh, portion, and you will get the latest copy by mail. So if you click on this link, uh, it will bring you to the 2022 version. It's not a PDF, so you would still see here the subsections. And if you look at the chapter 3 occupancy and you click on this one, it will open for you something, but it's not arranged just like what you see in the print. Okay. The good thing about this one, you can see that there are some words that's been inserted and they're colored red. Um, some subsections that are moved or added shall be in color blue. So something like this one was added. So yeah, you can access the 2022. Not like just a print model. The 2019 is you're gonna see it as is, just like on your binder. This is how it's written. Okay, so either way, that still would work, and I guess we can work with a 2019. Um, so the volume two of the California Building Code is mostly about structural strength materials, testing data, and all that other stuff. So structural engineers mostly use this to reference uh, their strength of material standards. And there's a link here that you can click also to look at that one. So let's just try to look at it really quickly. So the volume two, um, says here volume two of two, and here is the table of contents. And the first one says here structural design. You can see here it's this one is PDF because this is 2019. So it would give you loads and tables that talks about L over 360. And if you're not a structural engineer, you'd be trying to read this as a different language. This is going to talk about deflections. If you took structural engineering, you will see deflections of beams and walls and floors and all that other stuff. It also has sections on concrete, steel, wood. So this is mostly about strength and structure. So architects normally don't open this unless they want to look at a particular code referring to volume 2. Okay, so mostly we're going to work with the volume 1 uh, of the title 24 part 2. Okay, so now the purpose of the building code is to actually provide a means or ways to produce a building that is appropriately measured for space clearing and clearances, that has properly measured for accessibility and provided access for the disabled. And number one is actually safety. It it was built that way, or it was codified so that when you are designing a building, that you wouldn't have uh, a way to kill or harm the um, tenants of the building. So if you have an enclosed space um, that might have gas buildup, that you wanted means and ways to get that gas out of that building. If you have some equipment stored inside, that equipment is safe even though it's inside, because that equipment might be burning gas inside, and so you might need a flue to bring the smoke out of that building and out of the structure. Sizes of windows, types of windows, that's also part of building code. How the roof is built, or the ceiling or structure is built to protect the structure, not from fire, but to protect the structure long enough so that the tenants of the building, or people who are the building, can escape in a safe and timely manner. We are focused on getting a building permit. When we're trying to build a building, we're focused on getting a building permit, and we can't get a building permit if all these factors that are in the building code has not been met. Measurements and clearances, accessibility, safety. Because when you go to the building department and apply for a building permit, yeah, your plans get reviewed, and the reviewer checks for code compliance using whatever building code it's adopting to use at that point in time. It could be 2019, it could be 2022, and they're going to check for measurements and clearances, accessibility, safety, and when you have finally met that, then you will go to get a building permit approved, and you're ready to for construction. So this is the job of the architect, is to make sure that it passes the building code, because if the plan reviewer finds something and a lot of things, it would take a very long time before you get a building permit for your building. This one I got from another professor who taught this subject before. Um, the oldest known building code is from ancient Babylon. As you see, this one is from 1780, which is BC. We are in AD right now. And this one is from Hammurabi's Code of Laws. And if you look at this one, um, if a builder has built a house for a man and has not made his work sound, and the house he built has fallen and caused the death of its owner, that builder shall be put to death. So it's like a code, a building code that says, make your building strong, because if it kills the owner, then you will be put to death. So it's not really focused on safety, but punishment. It is the owner's son that is killed; the builder's son shall be put to death. So again, very very harsh. It's not really um, written to make or define how safe you can build a building, but it just talks about consequences. Okay, so the modern building code again focuses on measurements, includes access and safety. It doesn't deal with punishments. It's just like you won't get a permit if your building is designed that doesn't meet the code. You're not gonna be put to death because before we even get to that place, you have to get a permit, and no construction should start without a permit. So yeah, that's the benefit of today's building code. Uh, and there are several components of the building code. We got occupancy type construction, allowable floor area, height, exiting, fire protection, handicap, and engineering for the architect's focus. And these five components, you will have to do this at the very start of the project, and it's used to classify your structure before they even look at the handicap or engineering requirements of the building. They look at all of these at the very start. Okay, so we're gonna focus our lecture today on these components. So for this lecture, we're gonna just talk about this one, and we are going to reserve handicap and accessibility on another lecture. Okay, so I picked up this info from another professor. So thank you for providing this one. This is a step-by-step process on what you do when you're starting a project and using the building code. So number one is you need to find your occupancy, and it's in chapter 3 of the building code. So if we go to the building code and open up chapter 3 here, okay, this is the PDF again. You will see that this one talks about occupancy and classification. Okay, and here's the scope, and then you will see your classifications within here. And the first one, which is contained in subsection 303, is the assembly group A. Okay, so that's the first thing that you need to do. The second thing that you need to do is determine whether the sprinklers are required, and it's on chapter 9 of section 903. I'm going to leave you to open this and find out on section 9 over here, 903. So scroll down. Well, I'm doing it for you now, right? But yeah, you scroll down and you find a subsection 903. Here's 903, but there's also 903.1, 903.2, stuff like that. So here's 903.1, generally, what we're talking about, sprinklers. 903.1, you can have alternative protection. That means you don't need sprinklers, but if you don't need protection sprinklers, there should be alternative means of providing protection. And then you got 903, where do you need uh, fire sprinklers? Okay, and then you got it from group A, group B, and all that other stuff. Okay, so number two, when using the code, you classify your building based on its occupancy. We're going to go through that one in a little while. And then you determine whether you need sprinklers on it. And then you determine the construction type. Construction type means that are you building, is your structure made out of wood or steel or concrete? So that's defined in chapter 6. Um, allowable floor area, your client might want a multi-story, building, but if the zoning code doesn't permit that, he can't really do anything about it. And if his type of construction, he said, build me a four-story all wood, that could be a problem. Okay, and this chapter will determine your allowable floor area. We're going to go through that one again. Number 5, um, once you have found your allowable floor area, the next portion would be what is the height of your building? How many stories? And it's also found in chapter 5. And the last one is a means of egress. Very, very important. Plan review always looks at all these four things. If they're competent, they're going to look at this one because this is about if there's a fire, how would you exit your people? Uh, so how many exits do you need to provide? The distances on and so let's go through them. And let's talk about classifications first, or what we call occupancy. Okay, so there are 10 types of occupancy in the building code. And if you click on this one, I think I provided a link to that one. And occupancy is in chapter 3. And if you look at this chapter, you'd see assembly group A. So there's a group A, then you have a group B, and then you have a group E. So there's no C. Then you have a group F. Okay, so there are 10 of these groups. A is for assembly. Oops. A is for assembly. B for business. E for education. F for industrials or factories. H is for hazardous buildings or high hazard situation or use building. I is for institutional, mercantile, residential storage, and then miscellaneous and utilities is group U. And then there are subgroups. If you're talking about assembly, you got A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, and here are sample building use for those. So if we talk about residential, we have R1, which is hotels and motels, then R2, dormitories and apartment, and then R3, those are for boarding. And then you got R4, which is a house that's built like a house, but not it's not built like an apartment, and it provides care or rehabilitation facilities. These are for home care businesses that's operating out of a house. Okay, so we have subgroups on that one. And what subgroup are we supposed to be using? Well, we are actually in occupancy group A. Our project is a cafe, and so group A or and subgroup A2 is for dining halls, restaurants, drinking establishments, and casino gaming area. So group A, which means assembly, is basically for the type of buildings that's primary use is to get a crowd of people inside, for eating, drinking, maybe a concert hall or a theater. Okay. And the reason why, you have this assembly group is you need to know how many exits do you need to provide if you're going to have a crowd of people inside a room. Having only one door is very dangerous in case of a fire because there's going to be a stampede towards the door. There's only one door. There's going to be people who will be trampled on and who might perish in that situation. So definitely different types of groups, or legally speaking, they are categorized based on their use. Uh, and um, in indoor sports, might have the same number of people as an outdoor sports, but because an outdoor is open to the air and it's not enclosed with walls, then the the means of egress or exiting is different between these two, and construction type is also might contribute to that. How many exits, location of exits, and everything. Okay, occupancy group B for businesses, and this is if you have a hospital, clinic, well, college education buildings are also part of group B, which is business. And if you look at here, even though college is education, group E is only for education schools that are 12th and below, so K to 12. and that's going to be considered education because if you have a university or college level building, that's going to be considered business now. And the rationale is that you might have more people in a college level with different uses, and so this category or occupancy group is different from a building primarily used by children, where you probably need a safer environment, um, which means that the definition or some requirements are going to be different compared to a building primarily used by adults. Okay. Another occupancy that we talked about is the education, primarily for children. Okay. And so, again, different requirements. Group F is for factories and industrial uses, and that has a different requirement. Not a lot of people probably on a factory, but there's large equipment that could cause fires and everything like that. So um, there's again different requirements for that one. The strictest of all occupancies is the hazardous material storage facility. So it could be a warehouse that would be storing some chemicals that are flammable. And if that's the case, then the building has to be built a certain way, and exiting has to be tested in a certain way. So yeah, it's a totally different animal. The next occupancy group is the institution, and institutions are has their own category because um, the people primarily using the facility cannot get out of the building by themselves, like jails. You know, they can't just leave; they have to be escorted out. So jails or hospitals are built differently because people can't get out by themselves. Hospital, those people in bed cannot get out of themselves. They have to be assisted to get out. So it's built differently than our cafe. Okay, because there will be some safety requirements in that facility before it could get approved. Okay, so it's again have varying requirements based on the amount of supervision required. Okay, so yeah, again, totally different animal. Next one is the mercantile businesses who that primarily is engaged in selling. So you would have people coming in and out and won't sit, won't gather. Just roam around, look at your shelves, and buy stuff, and then leave. So yeah, it's a totally different again group. Then you have your R for residential, and you have different kinds of subgroups. R1 is for hotels and motels, and R2 is for apartments and dormitories. R3 is normally our houses, so houses are R3. So if a land is a zone for R2, that means that you could put a duplex on it. I mean, you can put an apartment on it. But if it's an R3, then the most you can put in is duplex or two houses in that zone. And then R4 would be for home care businesses where you have like um, a four-bedroom house, and it's elderly who lives there, who's being assisted. Yeah, so these are considered R4. There is a trend nowadays, like for residential, that even though it's an R3, uh, you can get away um, with building one house or a duplex or more by adding what we call an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU. So that's starting to be the trend, especially for urban neighborhood. Even in suburbans, they would want you to build those because there is a housing crisis. There's a lot of homeless people or people who can afford houses, skyrocketing prices and rents, and so they want to encourage you to build an ADU for the in-law or the grandmother who probably can't live by herself, who would be in need of a house. So yeah, even though it's an R3 where you can only build one house, or one house with two separate units, a duplex on it, you could potentially add one more by adding an ADU. Okay, and then you have Group S, which is storage, uh, but it's non-hazardous. It could be a hangar. It could be just a warehouse of goods, as long as what you're going to store there is not flammable, like chemicals or something else. And then the last one is basically miscellaneous or utility buildings, uh, sheds, water tanks, and all that other stuff. Okay. Now, on one building, you can have mixed occupancy. That means that you can have a business, a mercantile down below, and then you could have offices on the second floor, and then on the third floor, you can have residential. And this is an example of a mixed use. And you can do that, but there would be certain requirements that between a residential and a business, uh, the structure, wall or floor, must be built with 1 hour. But if you have a business and a mercantile, the structure separating the two, wall or floor, must be built 2 hours. Okay, you can have that. There's some additional constraints that you have to meet, or how to build that structure with mixed occupancy. And you can see that like in Oak Park in Sacramento, there would be businesses downstairs, and then there would be residences or apartments upstairs. Okay, so the structure has to be built a certain way. Fire sprinkler requirements is something that you need to think about early on, and generally, you need fire sprinklers for businesses, unless the business is very small. So here are the categories where an automatic sprinkler system will be provided. If it's an A2, which is um, our occupancy, and we're not going to discuss all of the different occupancy that requires sprinklers, or because we're going to just concentrate on this one right now. If your A2 occupancy, us, the cafe or restaurant, um, has more than 5,000 square feet, okay, then you need to provide fire sprinklers. If the the flammable area, the area that can uh, catch fire, has an occupant load of 100 or more, then you have to provide fire sprinklers. Occupancy or occupant load are totally two different things. So we're going to talk about this one later. So you need to provide a fire sprinkler if you have more than 5,000 square feet. You need to provide a fire sprinkler if the occupant load is 100 or more. If the flammable area is located on the second floor, okay, or more, other than the exit level of discharge, then you have to provide fire fire sprinklers. Okay, or if the structure exceeds 5,000 square feet and contains more than one fire area containing Group A occupancy and is separated into two or more buildings by firewalls of less than 4 hour resistant rating without openings. So here are the four requirements, or triggers. We call them triggers. If you have one of these, then automatically you have fire sprinkler. So you might say, "Oh, our project is only 36. Our lot is 3,400 or 3,200, but our project is just 2,800. Oh, we don't need fire sprinklers." Well, that's true. You didn't meet number one, but what about, did you meet number two? Do you know what your occupant load is? Do you know whether you have a second floor? Because the last time I think we looked at our building is that the building in that particular street or zone under special planning district, you have to have 2 floors. And if you have 2 floors, that means that you actually triggered your fire sprinkler because your flammable area or the area that can catch on fire is located on a floor other than the level of exit discharge. So if your exit discharge is on the first floor, you have to provide fire sprinklers. Now, there's a way through this one that won't let you trigger this one. If you build I think a 4-hour rated stairwell fire exit, then the firewall exit itself is considered a outside. Okay, something like that. Okay, so but in our case, I know that there is no budget uh, restriction on this hypothetical project that we're doing. But yeah, I think we have to provide fire sprinkler because even though we're going to be less than 5,000 square feet, we might trigger fire sprinklers because of our occupant load, or if we didn't design our building with a 4-hour rated stairwell fire exit, then we definitely will have to have a fire sprinkler system. Okay. Now let's talk about construction type. Construction type is basically um, how are you going to build the structure, uh, and we're talking about the structural component. If are you building the build are you building the structure using wood, because that will be type 5. Are you building the structure out of timber, or lumber with a nominal size that I think bigger than 4 inches or something like that? I can't remember on top of my head right now, but this is wood frame construction. This is also wood frame construction, but this is using timber or 6x6, I mean, not, I don't think 4x4, 6x6, 8x8 wood. Whereas this one, you're using 2x4s or 2x6s. So this is like a um, stick building. This is a post and lintel building. Okay. Type 3, you'd be using something that's non-combustible. Uh, and type 3, type 2, and type 1, these are like all non-combustible. Uh, Non-combustible means that it doesn't melt or doesn't burn. It could be charred, or it could melt, but it doesn't burn. So steel, it melts, but it doesn't burn. Concrete, it cracks under heat, but it doesn't really burn. So uh, type 1 is the strongest in terms of fire rating, but it's the costliest. And the cheapest one to make is out of the 2x4s, 2x6s, but it is the uh, cheapest one to make, but it's not the safest in terms of fire. Okay, in terms of safety. Um, there's a table that talks about all these types, and here is something called the fire resistance rating requirement for building elements in terms of hours. The primary structure that you're building, it's made out of uh, wood, which is type 5. You have two categories, A and B. B is exposed, which shows us that this is zero. If you are building the structure, you do not need a certain rating because it's totally combustible. It's like when fire engulfs that place, you just have to exit, let it burn. But if you start to cover that up with a 1 hour rating, or cover that up with material, then you're required to have that 1 hour. Like put chipboard. Some chipboards, I think it's a 5/8 chipboard. I don't know if it's a half-inch chipboard right now on top of my head, but a half a half inch or a 5/8 chipboard has a 1 hour rating. That means that a 1 hour rating is that you will have to expose that material to fire for 1 hour before the fire will penetrate the surface. Okay, So yeah, so this is something that you can also look at on how um, fire ratings are required for building elements. Okay, so the structure itself, if it's type 5, you don't need any fire rating, but if it's out of concrete, then it must be a 2-hour rated. Covering it up with some other material will make it a 3-hour rating. The floors, the roof, so here's the ratings for them: a non-bearing wall and non-bearing partitions. Okay. Um, Allowable area is dictated also by your type of construction. So if we have an A2, okay, and an A2, if we do not cover our wood frame construction, then we can only go 1 story, and our structure cannot be more than 6,000 square feet. If we want 2 stories, well, we cannot leave all the 2 by 4s exposed. We need to cover that up with like chipboard. And if we cover that up with chipboard, it becomes still a type 5 wood construction, but since it's covered up, it becomes a type 5A. A type 5A means that it has been covered up. The main structure has been covered up with chipboard or something, some other material. And if you do that, then you can now put up a 2 story building. And how big of a building can you build? Well, 11,500. Okay. If you change your structure to like uh, timber, you know, 8 by 8 wood or whatever, then you can potentially now build a 3 story building. The walls will not necessarily be 3 hours. It's just that it tells you that the height of the building will now be 3 stories. We look at back at this one. If it's a type 4, the primary structure this it's not rated, but it has a height requirement on it. So if we go back here and you made your building out of concrete, which is type 1, um, type 1 uncovered concrete, you can put up under an A2 group 11 stories, okay, of building. You can put 12 stories, only 11. How big the area? UL means unlimited. So you can have a very, very large building as long as it doesn't go higher than 11 stories, as long as the structure is made of concrete but not covered. Okay. Now, once you cover the structure, um, other than exposing it to, other than leaving it exposed to the fire, you have some other material covering concrete. And you can cover concrete just by gypboard on metal studs. Now it becomes unlimited number of stories with unlimited square footage. Okay, so yeah, this table tells you what occupancy group are you under, how many floors you can build, and how big of a building you can construct. So in our case, we are going to be um, focusing on an A2, and we can build our A2 using out of wood, out of timber, out of some non-combustible material, or steel or concrete. Okay, and yeah, the minimum we can do is 2 stories. I mean, the maximum we can do is 2 stories, and the maximum area is 11,500. So this is where we are going to dwell. Now you might say that I'm going to use steel because the requirement didn't, or the hypothetical owner didn't require me to build it out of anything. Yeah, you can. Yeah, but also we're gonna try to be most realistic as possible. The next one is about means of egress. Means of egress is a way out, a way of exiting, and that's mostly in chapter 10. And there are 4 things that you need to know about means of egress. Okay, and they're mostly on chapter 10. Number one, you need to know your occupant load. Number two, you have to know how many exits you need to provide. Number three, the distance between those exits. And number four, how wide the corridors are to exit the building. They're all in chapter 10. Um, and you can look this up individually, going to chapter 10 means of egress, and then you can look up all these subsections. This is 1020.5. Okay, so here's 1004.1.2. So 1004 is way up here. You can see this is a very long document. So this is a very thick binder. Okay, so here's 1009. You can go up there to 1004. Since we've divided the time, so here's 1004. In particular, it says 1004.1.2. So 0.1.2, we passed it. 41.2. Okay, so here you go. And there's a table to go with it. Okay. Let's now talk about means of egress number one. So here's number one, estimating occupant load. So occupant refers to how many people. And you can see some gymnasiums, some restaurants, some offices would have to post their occupancy load for that room. So that means that you can't put in 300 people in a room designated for 49. Okay. So ours is an assembly, and if the seating is not fixed, okay, then you are under unconcentrated, meaning you can move them about, okay, these tables and chairs. And how will you know your occupant load? You divide the area by 15, and that's your occupant load. So if you have 1800 um, square foot of cafe, so calculator, we look over here. So if we have 1800, and if I divide that by 15, the occupant load is 120. Okay, 120. So let's go back to our fire sprinkler. You have to provide fire sprinklers if your occupant load is 100 or more. And we just found out that just on the cafe itself, our occupant load is 120. That doesn't include the offices, okay? The bathrooms, which has an occupant load of 1. So, yeah, we definitely have to provide a sprinkler system. So, going back to the occupant load here, um, you will not get all the area of the building, only the particular area that has a use of a cafe. Because in a building, you might have a dining area where you have tables and chairs, and that one has a different occupant load compared to a kitchen. Kitchen, you have an occupant load for every 20 square feet, you have one. Okay. Um, but for a dining area where you have, dining and chairs and table, you have one occupant load for every 15 square feet. So if you have 480 by 15, you got 32. If you have a kitchen that's 200 and the occupant load of kitchen is just one occupant load for every 200, then 200 divided by 200 is one. If you have a waiting area um, has a more occupant load, because if you have a 90 square foot area and you divide that by 5, you get 18. So this little space here where people are supposed to be just standing, You divide that by 5 and you get 18, and that will increase your occupant load. So, naming a room is also a factor because if you don't name this room as a waiting room and it's just an open area that it's part of the dining area, then this is just part of the dining area and it doesn't have a 5 square foot occupant load. It will be part of the 15. So definitely not naming a room um, that's directly connected without a door will certainly not trigger a higher occupant load. And in which case, since there is actually no door here, that this is not going to be considered a different. But once you label that area and the building permit or the plan review sees that area, they will look at that area as what you've labeled it with, and it would they would calculate the occupant load based on what you say it would be. Okay, so yeah, you have to be careful with how you name your rooms. Okay, um, now let's talk about the number of exits. So the number of exits is generally two, unless unless you have 49 occupant loads, or your occupant load is 49 or less. For occupancy A, B, E, F, M, and U. So that's a very small occupant load. Okay, so we normally do not have any number of exits for restaurants that's um, less than two. You always have two, one in the front and one in the back. Okay. Now there are also some exceptions here, or something that would trigger more exits. If you have 501 to 1,000, then you would have three or more exits. Four exits if you have more than 1,000. If your room is an open space with walls and roof and it's enclosed, but you are serving uh, a crowd, and when you divide that area by 15 or 10, it gives you 1,000 or more, then you need four exits. Okay, so but generally we always have two. Okay, um, and then let's talk about the distance between those exits. The distance between those exits for occupancy A, our occupancy for our building. If you have a fire sprinkler required, then the distances between the exits is 200 feet. Okay, without sprinklers. If there are sprinklers, then you can increase that by 50 feet. So now it's 250 feet. So what is this distance we're talking about? The distance from one door to the farthest corner of your room. Okay, that would be what it's asking you to determine. Okay, now in the California 2019 building code, the table has moved. Before it was in 1016.2, which is an older code. Now the code is found under 1017, and it's still the same. Well, the reason I'm showing you this here is if you look at this table and this table, they're basically the same. Okay, we now have this institution that says 150 without a sprinkler. Okay, and increase it to 200 with sprinklers. But basically, um, you have 200, okay, and 200 still here. So they're basically the same. Um, very little change. Okay. So what do you mean by exit axis travel distance? So here's a diagram. This is now under 1017 of the new 2019 building code. The travel distance to exit is calculated from the very farthest corner of the building. You cannot just go straight. You have to measure the foot travel. So if there is a furniture, you have to go around that furniture. If there's a wall, you have to go parallel to that wall until you can exit. Okay, you can exit diagonally. You don't need to exit 90 degrees. So here's the actual foot travel from the very corner of the building. clearing the table, moving around the wall, exiting the wall. I mean the door, and then going around the corner, and then finally going to the exit. So this is the exit travel, and that one has to be on fire sprinkled buildings. That one has to be 250 for assembly occupancy maximum. Okay, so what if you have 2 floors? Well, if you have 2 floors, same concept. Start from the farthest corner and then go around any fixture or furniture. The fire exit is going to be considered here down below if you go through a stairwell that is unprotected. But if you have a building and you design the stairwell to be a protected stairwell, a fire exit stairwell, the door to the stairwell is considered to be your exit door because there is this firewall separating another area. So this you would see that in multi high-rise building, not high-rise, maybe 4 stories or more, where you have a stairwell that has this fire exits, and when you exit that door, you can't get back in. You can push yourself out, then you can't get back in without a key. Okay, so that's considered a fire exit stairwell, and that's considered to be like an outside area. Okay, so again, how you design it, um, it's going to change the calculation of your distance of travel. Okay, um, when you exit and you go through a space, you are allowed to go through from your office to the corridor to the kitchen before you exit. You can do that as long as they are accessories to one another. Meaning, if you have a restaurant and to go to one exit, you have to go through the kitchen, that's okay. But if you have a restaurant and then you have to go through another occupancy group area, like let's say the owner has a restaurant on the left side and then he has a store area on the right side, you cannot go through the store to exit. You must have the restaurant go exit towards the outside immediately. You cannot exit towards the store before you go to the exit. Okay, so that's what this intervening space subsection means. Okay, and there are exceptions to this one also. So in this case, it says that you can't really go through an H occupancy. Okay, and then there's some exceptions. Okay, so generally there's two, but there are certain cases where you only need one. And when can you only have one exit? If you have less than 49 occupant load per story, because you can have a protected stairwell fire exit. And if your building has one floor with an occupant load of 49, then you can travel 75 feet from the farthest corner of that floor or that story to the exit door of the fire protected stairwell. Okay, but that's like very, very small for if you got multiple stories. That's now we're not talking about residents, okay? We're talking about assemblies, okay? Because residences that are R3, and you can see there's not R3 here. That's a different occupancy altogether. We're talking about here assembly or apartments or dormitories, institutions, and all that other stuff. Okay, so generally always to exit because the only time you only need one is when you have less than 49 for each floor. Then you can have a shorter travel distance. Okay. Um, and then the last number four out of what we're talking about here. We were talking about the means of egress, exiting. We discussed occupant load, how many exits, typically two, and then we talked about the distances, and now we're number four, which is the last one, about means of egress. Um, the corridor width. So again, this is when you name something a corridor, it triggers a certain width. Okay, and sometimes you can't get away with naming something a corridor, especially when you have a hotel and you got rooms on each side. The space in between those rooms, that's going to be considered a corridor. You can't call that um, lobby. Okay, that's going to be considered corridor. So anyway, uh, the width of the corridor is basically you multiply your occupant load by 0.2 an inch, and then you get your required width. So that's the general calculation, but there's also a minimum. So you cannot have anything that's narrower than 44 inches based on this table, or if your occupancy load is less than 50, then it must be 36 inches. Okay, and this table here, 1018.2, is I think based on the previous code. What is the previous code? Well, let's check. Previous code, if I go to California and I filter by year, we now have 2022, 2019. So it could be from a 2017 code or the 2016 code. Okay. So we are looking at 2019. You can look at 2022, but 2019 is what you can look at. Here's your building code, volume 1, Cal 24 volume 1. So over here, that's that one. And then means of egress is on 10. And then you can look up the particular code, that's 1018. Okay. Further down here, 1013. Further down here, 1017. And the next one is 1018. And there's no more 1018, right? So you don't see 1018 table. There's no, because it's now moved. On the 2019, it's now a 1020 table 1020.1, and that's what we have here. Okay, and you can look at this one, and they're primarily the same. Um, any facilities not listed below 44 inches. Okay, with required occupancy load of 50, 36 inches. Okay, so yeah, we would have a minimum 44 for our project if we have a corridor. Okay, if you don't have a corridor and it's just an open space in between tables, then don't call it a corridor because it's not a corridor. Okay, so again, how you name it triggers some definitions on it. Okay, so um, so that's basically uh, how we're going to end this lecture. Is we just discussed occupancy type, construction type, floor areas, allowable floor areas, and that's from this table here. If you wanted two floors and you are doing your construction with, framing, wood framing, if it's exposed wood framing, you can only do one floor, 6,000 square feet. But if you're going to cover your wood framing with chipboard, that's type 5A, then you can go as many as two floors and as big as 11,500. So that's what we discussed under allowable floor areas. We talked about height also, including these are the two things that we discussed on that table. And then we talked about exits, how many exits, how far the exits. We talked about the width of the corridor to that exit. Then we talked about fire protection, which is sprinkler system at the very, very start. Okay. Handicap, accessibility, and engineering requirements. We're gonna reserve that to the lecture, but we're ending this lecture based on these components because we want to classify the structure first, and then once we know the classification of structure, then we can do our floor plans and the area of the building based on all these six components, And once we have that, then we can now go into the detail and make sure that we have accessibility provided for the handicap, and we have met all the engineering requirements. So we're going to reserve that for another lecture. I'm going to provide a PDF to what was discussed here on these slides. But yeah, so this is the brief introduction to the California Building Code, okay, for EDT 320. Okay.